Okay, so welcome to Sangha Night. And I'm not sure if anyone's here for the first time at Sangha Night, recently off an intro course. And if that's you, then an especially warm welcome. Really great to see you all. And so a couple of weeks ago, we started a new theme at Sangha Night. And this theme is called Thus Have I Heard. So in case you missed Bodhinaga's exposition a couple of weeks ago, the reason it's called Thus Have I Heard is because that's the way that a lot of the suttas, the original discourses in this ancient Indian language called Pali, they're written. This is the first words of those suttas, those discourses. Thus have I heard. And the reason that's the first words of those suttas is because Buddhism was an oral tradition for quite a long time, for hundreds of years. And it was passed down by word of mouth. So when the teachings were finally written down, they were written down as remembered, as heard. Thus have I heard. So that's how they start. So in this what is it? Theme. Thank you very much. In this theme, we're going to be looking at some very important and significant discourses, teachings of the Buddha. So 2 weeks ago, Bodhinaga started us off, and he talked about the very, very first sermon, the very first teaching the Buddha ever gave, which was about the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And then last week, Satyajoti talked to us about the Satipatthana Sutta, about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And now, this week, I'm going to fast forward right to the very end of the Buddha's life, and I'm going to tell you about the last words of the Buddha. So the last words of the Buddha appear in a sutta called the Parinirvana Sutta. So Parinirvana, which is a Pali word, or Parinirvana in Sanskrit, is a word which means the final nirvana, or final extinction. So it's the very last moment of the Buddha's life as a human being. So the sutta, the discourse, is very long, so I'm not going to have time to tell you very much. So I'm going to start from the moment when the Buddha is 80 and he becomes ill with dysentery. And it's very dire, and he knows that he's going to die. So he journeys to a place called Kusinara, where he knows he's going to attain Parinirvana, his final nirvana. And he asks his followers to make him a bed between 2 sal trees. And he lies down between those 2 sal trees. And then out of season, magically, those sal trees burst into beautiful fragrant blossoms and rain down upon the Buddha's head. And then many things happen while he's there in Kusinara over that night. So many, many people come to visit him. Gods come to visit him to pay their final respects. And he gives encouragement and rejoices in his friends who will be left in the Sangha when he's gone. He checks to make sure all the monks are clear about the teachings, whether anyone's got any final doubts or any final questions. So he's very careful to leave things in a good state. And he ordains his very last disciple. And then when all of this has happened, and he's come to the very last moments in his life, he turns to the monks, and then this is what he says. Behold now, monks, I exhort you. All conditioned things are impermanent. With mindfulness, strive on. And then the Buddha enters meditation. He enters the dhyanas, the absorptions. And from that state, he passes away. And that is the end of his life. So the sutta is very long, and I find it very beautiful and moving. And we have this big festival in February, which is a Parinirvana festival, where we hear more of that sutta. So I want to focus on this word mindfulness. So the Buddha exhorts us to strive with mindfulness. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this talk. So what is mindfulness? So Satyajoti told us a little bit about mindfulness last week when we were looking at the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the Foundations of Mindfulness Sutta. But the sort of mindfulness that Satyajoti was talking about is only one small aspect of a very broad range of practices which comprise mindfulness. Actually, mindfulness is a very broad term. And actually, it's very popular these days, isn't it, mindfulness? I recently flew somewhere, and I went to the airport stationery, Smiths or whatever it was, And I was amazed to see an entire shelf full of mindfulness colouring books. A whole shelf of them. I was amazed. So obviously mindfulness has something to do with colouring in. It also has something to do with mental health, so it's getting prescribed a lot on mental health now. I go into schools to work with children. I often get asked to come in and do mindfulness with the children. And when you come to the Buddhist Centre, we do the mindfulness of breathing, which seems to involve watching the breath. And then when we recite the precepts, we talk about purifying our mind with mindfulness clear and radiant. So there's a lot of different things that mindfulness seems to cover. So what does it actually mean exactly, mindfulness? And there's a wonderful quote in a book called Mind in Harmony by a man called Subhuti, who's quite a senior order member in our movement. And he says this. He says, "Of course, all Buddhists know that it is important to be mindful. But if somebody said to you, 'Be mindful,' would you know precisely what sort of action is being urged upon you?" I think that's an excellent quote. So he's sort of reminding us that mindfulness is a very kind of, it can be a bit vague, really. So actually, mindfulness, the English word mindfulness, is used to translate 3 different words that the Buddha used, which all have an aspect of awareness, 3 different sorts of awareness, flavours of awareness. And the 3 terms together that I'm going to talk about tonight, all together they create some sort of map of the breadth and depth of this word that we use, mindfulness. And I'm really happy to be talking about this because personally I love this model. And before I came across this model, I must confess, I found mindfulness quite boring and I couldn't really understand why it was supposed to be so important. Like why watching my breath was going to get me enlightened. I couldn't quite see it myself. So I've really enjoyed and really valued coming across this teaching. So I hope that some of that will come across to you. So here are the 3 aspects of mindfulness. So we'll start with the top one, sati. So sati we heard something about last week in Satyajyoti's talk. So I'm not going to say loads about it because I don't want to repeat her. But on the other hand, I do have to say something because the aspects of mindfulness are quite connected. And I want to say enough so that it's clear how it's connected to the other 2 and also how it's different from them as well. So, last week, when we were hearing about the Satipatthana Sutta, we heard how the Buddha was exhorting his disciples to focus on their direct experience. So, noticing the physical sensations in the body, their thoughts, and the emotions arising within them. So, this is the specific sort of awareness that sati is. So, sati is the Pali, and there's also this other language, Sanskrit. So you might have heard smriti instead, but I'm going to use the Pali sati. So sati is this sort of awareness which is having close attention to our direct experience and being in tune with it and the simple and raw experience that's going on in our bodies before we start to assess it, before we start to interpret it, before we start to have a commentary about it and make up lots of stories about it. So what's actually going on in that moment? And sometimes people have this thing where you say mindfulness and they say, yeah, that's just being in the moment, isn't it? Well, actually, mindfulness is a lot more than that. But sati is this, you could say sati is this aspect of mindfulness, which is being in the moment. And it literally means something like remembering or recollecting. So sati implies being able to remember or recollect what we're actually doing. So being able to bring our mind back again and again to the thing that we've decided that we're going to do. So remembering what we're supposed to be doing and holding our mind steady on that object, whatever it is, without wandering off and getting distracted. But with sati, the sort of object that we're holding our attention on is also important. So for it to be mindfulness in the Buddhist sense, the object of attention must be a skillful or wholesome object and not an unskillful one. So what does that mean? So a skillful object of attention would be one whereby if we focus on it, our mental states are likely to become more positive and not less positive. So, for example, in meditation, we might choose to focus our attention on the breath. And if we focus on the breath, we become more absorbed, and that's pleasurable, and that's a skillful object. Or we might focus our attention on a person, on our wish for them to be well and happy, as we do in the Metta. So these would be wholesome or skillful objects of attention. Of course, we could, and often do, choose to focus our attention on unskillful and unwholesome objects. Well, I certainly do anyway, I don't know about you. So we might choose to focus our attention on angry or grumpy thoughts. We might choose to focus our attention on our fantasies or our distractions. So if we hold our attention there, it's not like we're not remembering something, but we're remembering the wrong thing. And Subhuti talks about this as wrong memory. He says we are remembering, but we're just remembering something that's not helping us. So in that instance, sati, this sort of mindfulness, would be noticing that and then bringing our awareness from the unskillful object back to the skillful object. And often we need to do this again and again. So that's what it looks like in meditation. But as we heard last week, sati is also being practiced. All of these aspects of mindfulness could be practiced all the time, not just when we're meditating. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha mentioned a variety of different circumstances we could think about practicing mindfulness. Drinking, eating, defecating, urinating, walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, waking, speaking, and keeping silent. So basically all the time. So that's everything. So he's suggesting we use mindfulness all the time in every activity we're doing. We always have this attention to the physical experiences, the actual experiences. And I was thinking in my own life, some instances when this sort of mindfulness, this sati, is particularly present for me. So I practice Tai Chi, and that's a physical activity where attention to the physical experience and where we're relaxed or not relaxed is very, very key. And the more focus I can have on my body and the sensations, the more successful it is and the more pleasurable it is. And also with something like washing up, which can be quite mundane. We can often just want to get to the end of washing up and not think about it. But focusing on the sensations of the washing up can actually make it quite a pleasurable experience. And also I was thinking about playing the piano, which I do. It's another activity where the sort of mindfulness required is is sati. It's this attention to what's actually going on in that moment, not being in the past or the future, but being right there in that moment. So why is sati a good thing? It's all very well saying this is what it is, but why would we want to practice sati? This was my question for years, in fact. Why would we want to practice sati? And one answer, I suppose, is that we often spend a lot of our time caught up in our thoughts and stories about the past or the present, which frankly can be quite exhausting. And it's a relief, a blessed relief sometimes, just to be able to let go of all of that preoccupation and chuntering on that we do in our minds and just be with what's going on at this moment. So that can be a lovely relief, and that can be one of the reasons why meditation is so pleasurable for people. But sati isn't just having a nice, pleasant break from ourselves. Actually, it's totally crucial to the spiritual life, because without sati, we can't be in the gap. So unless we have this ability to be aware of what's actually going on in our experience, the raw sensations of our experience, without loads of commentary, without getting caught up in them and identifying with them, unless we can do that, have this sati, then we don't have any freedom to respond creatively, and we don't have any freedom to respond more in line with our values and our ideals. So this sati is absolutely crucial if we're going to transform ourselves in line with the Dharma. And not to just keep responding in automatic ways that we've always responded in before. So sati, so that's probably all I want to say about sati, because we heard a little bit about it last week. So we've got sati here. So being in the moment is obviously very important, but it's not the end of the story by any means, because we can't just live in the moment. And I think a mistake that people can make, particularly in the West, is they confuse the whole of mindfulness with this just being in the moment. But we don't just live in the moment. We have a reflexive awareness, and we have a continuous existence, which hopefully we're all aware of. and that our actions that we have now, that we do now, will have a consequence in the future. So it behoves us to be aware of the continuation of our existence and the consequences of our actions. So we can't just live in the now, we need a different sort of awareness to be aware of what's coming. And that's what sampajanya is, the second one. Sampajanya in Pali, or samprajanya in Sanskrit. So what sampajanya asks us to look at is the directionality of movement in our lives. So where we're trying to get to in our lives and how we can go about getting there. And it literally means something like clear comprehension. And it implies an intelligence, a wisdom and understanding. So it's not just about being able to perceive our experience directly, which is what sati is. It's something more than that. It's having an awareness of how our experience now fits into a much bigger picture, the broader context of our lives ongoingly. So Bantu Sangharachita, who set up this movement, he says about sampajanya, everything we do should be done with a sense of the direction that we want to move in, and of whether or not our current action will take us in that direction. So everything we do should be done with a sense of the direction we want to move in, and of whether or not our current action will take us in that direction. So he translates sampajanya as continuity of purpose. So what would sampajanya, what would continuity of purpose look like in our lives? So on a fairly mundane, on a normal, everyday level, it just looks like living a fairly joined up sort of life. So we're aware of our goals and where we want to be going, and then the choices that we're making moment to moment are basically moving us in the direction that we want to go. So for example, mundane example, if I want to become really, really fit, or somebody wants to become really, really fit, then they'll have to make particular sorts of choices in life that will lead to that goal. So they might need to think about what they're eating, they might need to think about if they're getting enough sleep, and how much exercise they're doing. So sampajanya would be holding the awareness of wanting to be fit in mind enough so that when they come to making choices about how to behave, they're likely to make choices which will enable them to eat the right foods and get enough sleep, so that they suddenly don't find themselves eating a pizza in front of the telly when they were thinking they were going to be at the gym. Yeah, so that's sampajanya. So for those of us here who identify as Buddhists, I imagine that the direction we would like our lives to be taking is one of moving towards enlightenment. So moving towards becoming like the Buddha, manifesting more and more compassion, more and more wisdom. And even for those of us who don't identify as Buddhists here, I'm imagining that the reason that you're here is because you share some of those ideals, an ideal for growth, an ideal for deeper happiness, deeper contentment. Those things are all in line with Buddhist, these are all characteristics of the enlightened state. And I'm imagining that one of the reasons that you've chosen to come tonight, apart from the fact that it's so much fun, is because you've got a sense that your goal, this is your goal in life, and coming here to be with the Sangha, hearing more about the Buddhist teachings, deepening your connections with the Sangha, deepening your meditation practice, these things will help to move you in the direction of your overall goal of growth. And that is an example of sampajanya, so an example of making a choice in your life that's helping to manifest, move you towards your highest goal. So deepening our sampajanya, having more and more sampajanya in our lives, trying to practice it more consistently, would look like having this awareness all the time, so that this awareness influences more and more of the choices we're making, all the choices that we're making ideally. So what to eat, where to shop, what to say, how to act, how to spend our time, and so on. So ideally all of those things that we're doing, all of those choices we're making, would be influenced by this goal that we've got in mind all of the time, of this ideal for growth and to recognise our deepest potential. And so assessing our decisions in terms of how is this helping me grow? How is this helping me become more compassionate and more altruistic? How is this helping me become like the Buddha? So this is the ideal, and I'm guessing that if you're like me, you don't manage this all the time. So it's quite an ask to have the goal of enlightenment in mind all of the time. I certainly don't think. And sometimes it's easier to see sampajanya when we're not doing it. So I have a very strong aspiration to gain enlightenment. It's one of the vows I took at my ordination. And that's very important to me. And I'm aware that one of the ways to move towards enlightenment is to have an effective meditation practice which requires being fresh and alert in the mornings. Also, I really like watching Star Trek, and although I have this goal of enlightenment and having a good meditation practice, even so, I find myself staying up late watching Star Trek and making it totally oblivious to my actual goal of getting enlightened. I'm much more focused on my goal of watching Star Trek. So that's a lack of sampajanya, just in case you're in any doubt about that. So I've noticed this lack of sampajanya tends to happen when I'm being a bit vague. And I've identified, I think, two sorts of vagueness that can lead to sampajanya. So the first sort of vagueness, I think, is vagueness about the goal. So I think when we're not clearly in touch with our goal and where we want to be, it's very difficult to be motivated to behave in ways that move us towards that goal. I mean, it goes without saying, really, but I certainly don't remember that a lot of the time. So when this Star Trek scenario sort of happens, it's generally because I'm less in touch with my inspiration, less in touch with the goal of Buddhahood, the beauty of that, less in touch with my altruistic ideals, my desire to benefit the world. I'm much smaller somehow. And my connection with the transcendental then is very weak, and I don't really have a sense of anything beyond. And so when I'm not keeping that strong sense of something bigger, something higher, the pull to the mundane is much stronger. And the excitement then of watching Star Trek is much more pronounced and totally overrides the kind of more lofty goal of becoming enlightened. And it's much more exciting as well. So in cases like this, when there's a vagueness about the goal, I think the antidote then is to focus on the goal, deliberately and consciously redirect my energies towards connecting with the goal. So, for example, I might decide to do some puja, some ritual, which will have verses which evoke the big aspiration to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings, which is very inspiring for me. Or maybe to look at some Buddhist images that inspire me or uplift me, or read some teachings, Buddhist teachings. So something which connects me with something a bit higher. And qualities that I hope to achieve and to attain, like fearlessness and unshakability and kindness. So that's vagueness about the goal, but I think sometimes it's possible to be very clear about the goal, but very vague about the means by which we're going to attain the goal. So I think that's the other sort of vagueness about the means to achieve our goal. So, for example, sometimes I can find myself in meditation doing the mindfulness of breathing, and I find myself a bit disconnected with it because I'm not really clear about why I'm doing it. I'm not really that clear why watching my breath is going to get me enlightened. There's no kind of joined upness there in my experience. And when I've got this lack of clarity, I'm much less committed to the practices that I'm doing because I'm not clear why they're going to help me. And so I'm much more likely to think, oh well, who cares if my meditation's rubbish? I'm not that convinced it's going to get me enlightened anyway. May as well watch Star Trek. So that's lack of clarity about the means. And I think in those cases for me, it's very important to be, when I sit down to meditate, or do anything in fact, to consciously bring to mind why I'm doing it and how it's going to move me in a positive direction. And if I try to do that and I find that I'm still unclear and actually I don't know, then it's important for me to go away and reflect on it. Why am I doing these practices? It's not enough just to do things automatically without my heart behind it, because that won't get me anywhere. I certainly won't get enlightened by doing the mindfulness of breathing without any emotional engagement at all. So that's vagueness about the practice, about the means. So I was reflecting with Sampajanya. It's a great thing to have, and obviously it's very important. Developing Sampajanya can be quite a challenge, in fact. I was thinking when we're examining our lives and assessing them for Sampajanya, or lack thereof, actually it can be quite difficult when we honestly look at our choices and we discover that the choices we're making about how we're spending our time, say, or how we're acting, actually aren't moving us in the direction we want to go. And that, I'm sure, is the case for all of us. We're all behaving in ways that aren't really helping us in some way or other. And it can be quite painful to notice this, especially when we can't immediately do anything about it. So sometimes they're really long-standing habits we can't change overnight. And sometimes they're situations we're in which we can't immediately change, like our situations at home or at work, say. And I think it's just really important to be kind with ourselves here and have some patience. We've realised we're behaving in ways that isn't helpful, and we're going to try and transform that. But we're just to acknowledge that we're very unintegrated beings, all of us. We've all got lots of different strands in our being that all want to go in different directions. And most of us, live in quite complex lives, quite complex situations. It's not about judging ourselves and saying, oh, I'm a bad Buddhist or I'm rubbish because I'm not doing all these things that are never going to help me. That's not helpful. It's just about noticing where we're putting our energy and where we could put it differently. So gradually putting more and more of our energy behind choices that will move us in the direction we'd like to go in. And if we do this, then gradually our lives will transform. And they'll transform more into a life where it's a bit like we've got lots of different tributaries of a river, and they're all flowing into one powerful river, which is all flowing in one direction towards this vast sea of enlightenment. And if we do this, then gradually we'll have a sense of becoming less divided in ourselves, of more unity within our being, and more integration within our being. So there'll be more and more over time a harmony between our ideals and our actions, more of a congruence between those things. And when we start behaving in these ways more and more, with more Sampajanya, it unlocks lots and lots of energy. So I have an image, which I really like, of the Olympian athlete. So I was reflecting on Sampajanya during the Olympics, and I was noticing it because my own meditation was so pathetic. I was sitting there, I was so vague, and I thought, gosh, these Olympians, they're amazing, aren't they? They train every day, they come what may, they throw all their energy into it, they're so clear about their goal of their medal, and they're so clear that the practices and the training are going to lead to that goal. They just seem to have unlimited energy. And I thought, if I was as clear as those Olympians about my goal of enlightenment, and if I was as clear about this meditation getting me to that goal, wouldn't it be amazing? I might have as much energy as those Olympians. So I think that's quite a nice image to bring to mind in terms of Sampajanya. Great. Okay, so that's the first two. So we're on to the final aspect of mindfulness, apamada in Pali, or apramada in Sanskrit. So if we just slightly reverse back to where I started, which is with the Buddha's final words, so with mindfulness, strive on. So the word he uses for mindfulness there is apamadana. And apamadana means literally with apamada, by means of apamada. And apamada, so what is apamada? So pamada, the opposite, means heedless, intoxicated, or drunk. So apamada is the opposite of that. It's behaving in a way which is sane and rational and heedful, and it's translated as non-heedlessness or care or vigilance. So apramada is the aspect of mindfulness which has an ethical dimension. It's about having an ethical sensitivity and ethical awareness. So you could translate appamada as ethical vigilance. So you could translate the Buddha's whole last sentence as, with ethical vigilance or with ethical heedfulness, strive on. So there's an image for appamada that I really love, which I slightly nicked from Subhuti and embellished in my imagination. And that is of a guard in my mind, an appamada guard. So I imagine this guard in my mind. My guard has a little sword, and he's standing there watching what I'm doing. And this guard, this appamada guard, absolutely loves beautiful mental states and positive mental states. It's aesthetically drawn towards beautiful states of mind. So if this guard in my mind spots an opportunity for me to behave in a skillful way, which will help these beautiful states arise, say, for example, I'm thinking about whether to give money to somebody who needs it, or say something kind to somebody who's upset, or maybe I'm in meditation and there's somebody I don't like very much, I'm trying to wish them well. My appamada guard is drawing towards those. He's saying, yes, brilliant, hooray. So he's like a cheerleading squad. He's really wanting me to move towards those pleasant, positive and mental states. So the more appamada we have, the more of this sort of ethical awareness we have, the more we'll naturally, spontaneously be drawn towards these light and beautiful states of mind and the actions that accompany them. On the other hand, the appamada guard is absolutely disgusted by and repulsed by ugly actions which have the opposite effect, so actions which harm ourselves or others, which are ugly. So if I'm in a community meeting and my appamada guard notices I'm about to say something very grumpy, or maybe he notices I'm about to start going into some sort of moan in my meditation, my appamada guard will jump to attention and stop me. He'll try and move me in a different direction. So he tries to intervene and steer me away from unhelpful actions that cause myself and others suffering. So that's the appamada, it's this ethical sensitivity. I do want to stress though that appamada is definitely not about should. There's no sort of should in appamada. It's a natural heart response in a direction away from ugly action and towards beautiful action. And you could call it sensitivity to the morally aesthetic quality of actions. And I was thinking when I was writing this talk, in a way it's a bit weird that we need this sort of awareness, isn't it? Because we've sort of all heard that behaving in unskillful ways leads to suffering. And I think we probably all subscribe to that, more or less. And that acting in an ethically positive way leads to happiness. We all had the beginner's course, we all heard this. So you think we'd all know this, wouldn't you? And that acting in the opposite way is literally pamada, is literally mad. But we do it anyway, don't we? We're always constantly acting in ways which are causing ourselves or others suffering. And I was thinking, I've got a section here called Some Thoughts About Why We Act in Mad Ways. So I think we act in this mad way because, there's a great quote that Bhante Sangharajita said about the main goal of the spiritual life. And he says he thinks the main goal of the spiritual life is to find emotional equivalence to our intellectual understandings, an emotional equivalence to our intellectual understandings. So, for example, I know perfectly well, in my mind, I think, that acting out of anger and hatred is not going to help me or anybody else. There's a lovely quote in the Dhammapada that I agree with that says that hatred only leads to hatred. There's an ethical precept that you take when you're ordained, which is about overcoming hatred. I'm pretty convinced that hatred's not a great thing in my mind, and yet I'll be in a situation, I get annoyed, and then I find myself stoking myself up. Yes, oh, they're so annoying, rah, rah, rah. I'm doing it, I'm acting in a completely mad way. And why am I doing that? Because I don't emotionally understand the truth that anger creates suffering. I don't emotionally understand the truth that I'm intellectually subscribing to. And I think that every time we act in these unethical ways, it's actually because we haven't emotionally understood what we intellectually believe. In a way we can think about it is that we've taken it in through our head and it has to filter down into our heart, which I think is where the Appamada God lives, in our heart. And so Appamada is a task of trying to find ways of what we've imbibed with our head filtering down into our heart so that our Appamada can respond. So obviously it's very important, this ethical mindfulness aspect, because if we don't have this ethical aspect of mindfulness, we can't practice the precepts, we can't live with a way which accords with our deepest ideals, and we can't move in that direction of growth and enlightenment. And maybe you can see from this why the Buddha was so keen to exhort us with his very final breath that this is what we should do with our lives. So I'd like just to spend the rest of the time giving you a new list, which has come out of my own mind. See, some of you will know I really like this. I've created one of my own. 3 ways that we could strive towards this sort of Appamada, deepen this sort of Appamada, this ethical sensitivity. So the first one is to develop our imagination. So developing ethical awareness requires sensitizing our heart, deliberately trying to sensitize our heart. And Bhante Sangha talks about metta in this way that I think is quite relevant. He says that metta, or love, is a vigorous expression of an imaginative identification with another living being. So an expression of an imaginative identification with another living being. So I think to sensitize our heart, we need to develop this ability to imaginatively identify with other living beings. And one obvious way that we do this when we're meditating is in the Metta Bhavana. So the Metta Bhavana is a structured practice where we're deliberately, over time, cultivating this empathy with other beings, trying to imagine ourselves into their experience so that we start to care more and more about whether they suffer or not, about whether we're hurting them or not. But also we can do this outside meditation, and I'd say this is equally, if not more important, because this is where we're spending most of our time not meditating. So the example that I'd like to share is about being vegan. I'm not sort of going to exhort us all to be vegan. This is just a personal example from my own experience. So I've been vegan for many, many years, and usually I find it very easy, actually. But every so often I find it less easy, usually when somebody eats tiramisu in front of me. So I have Italian heritage, tiramisu. I grew up eating tiramisu. So you might say that when I'm less in touch with my ethical principles, when my Appamada is less sort of honed, when my guard is a little bit sleepy or having a nap, I might think, oh, God, tiramisu, that would be really nice. So that, you could say, is a potential lapse of Appamada. I might be tempted to act unethically in that moment. So what I do in those moments, which do sometimes come, is I stop and I deliberately bring to mind the suffering of the animals involved with that tiramisu. So I might bring to mind the cow and the life that dairy cows live. Might bring to, I think there's eggs in tiramisu. Bring to mind the chickens and the horrible conditions that chickens live in. And once I've done that, if I can stop and make the effort to try to bring those beings to mind, and I really connect with that, then I don't want the tiramisu anymore. It's very, very easy then. Because my heart becomes engaged. It's not just in my head anymore, it's in my heart, and my Appamada has come back to life. And I just want to emphasise that it's not that I then think, oh yes, I ought not to eat the tiramisu. It's not a should. I don't want it anymore. I'm repelled from it. It is the embodiment of suffering. Why would I want to eat that? So I just move away from it and towards what I think is a more beautiful act of not eating it. So I don't want to it's not a kind of judgment or anything, this is just my own experience. So after I've actually made the effort to imagine those beings and their experience, the rest of it's very easy. I think the main effort here is to make the effort to engage imaginatively. And I think it's not always easy, because it's like we know that as soon as we start trying to imagine what's going on for somebody else, it's going to have an effect, and the effect is probably going to be that we won't be able to be quite as selfish as we're being at that moment. And we don't really want to be less selfish on some level. So it can be quite an effort to deliberately try to bring the experience of other beings to mind. But I think it does work. In my experience, it always works. So I'd like to suggest that one way we can strive and to develop our appamada is to develop our ability to imaginatively identify with other beings. Make more effort in that way. Okay, second one I'd like to talk about is reflecting on the effects of our previous actions or choices. So one way to become clearer about appamada, less vague, is to become more convinced about the fact that our actions do have particular effects, is to reflect on the actions, the effects that our previous actions have had. So we've got some learning. So again, once when Bhante Sangharashta was asked, somebody asked him apparently, so Bhante, how do you get enlightened then? And what he said was, reflect on everything that happens to you. Reflect on everything that happens to you. And I think that's really, I find it very profound, and I think it's quite relevant here. So an example from my own experience is that I have quite a critical mind, and that can manifest as a tendency towards harsh speech, particularly when I'm feeling a bit tired or grumpy. And it is a practice in my mind. I'm sort of conscious, vaguely, that I would like to be less harsh in my speech. Sort of fairly vague, really. I'm not that emotionally engaged with it a lot of the time, and so sometimes my speech is harsh. So what I could do about that, and what I do sometimes do about that when I'm in situations, is I deliberately bring to mind a situation in the past when I've spoken harshly and I've really suffered from the consequences. I've felt horrible and I've really hurt another person, and I reflect on the consequences it had for our relationship. So, importantly, I'm not doing this to sort of beat myself up and punish myself for being such a terrible person. I'm doing this to learn, in a way, if we're going to make these silly mistakes, we may as well learn something from them. And it reminds me a little bit of when I was once cooking in a tent for 100 people, and in a Buddhafield North Festival retreat thing. And there was an urn there, one of these hot water urns, and I lifted the top off the urn because I wanted to see if the water was boiling. And I lifted it off like this, and of course I got a horrible burn down my forearm. One of the worst injuries I've had, I think, from that water. So now, whenever I'm near an urn, and I think of taking the top off, there's like an alarm bell that goes off, like, don't take the top off in that same way, because you'll get hurt in the same way. So I think of it the same with our ethical practice. So if I can deliberately bring to mind, the last time I was about to say this, and I said it all went very wrong, if I can remember that, I'm much less likely to do it again. And the same is true for positive things as well, not just negative things. So if I can bring to mind, if I'm about to say something really cutting to somebody, and then I remember a time when I didn't, and I chose to say something kind instead, or just to say nothing, which sometimes is the best policy, and what a much beneficial effect that had. And if I can bring that to mind, then I'm much more likely to make that positive choice the next time. So that's the second one, so reflecting and learning from the effects of what we've done before. And then the final one is about being wise about our buttons. So what does that mean? So there are some situations in our lives which press our buttons more than other situations. So we've all got these. Might be at work, might be at home, it might be with particular people, it might be trying to get disorganised children off to school, or all these sorts of situations which tend to provoke a reaction in us when we're much more likely to behave unskillfully. And so one way that we can really help our appamada guard here is we can tell it, right, I'm going into this situation, particularly if you're going to see your family. I think this could be really helpful. I'm going into the battle zone. Be aware. Make sure you're ready. So then you go into the battle zone, of your button-pushing arena, and your guard is already ready, so it's much more poised to defend you against possible unskillful behaviour. And so, for example, when I'm feeling tired, as I've mentioned, when I'm feeling tired, I can tend to be quite harsh or critical, and I forget to say anything positive. So when I'm going into a meeting, it's sometimes helpful for me to think, am I tired? Am I feeling tired? If I'm feeling tired, just clock that, and then I know that what's coming out of my mouth is likely to be not so helpful. So it reminds me to monitor more carefully, be more sensitive to what's coming out of my mouth. So something we can all do, I think, is just reflect on what sorts of situations are likely to push our buttons, where we're likely to lapse into being a bit reactive and unhelpful. And think about, outside of those situations, think about how we could do that differently. So that's my list. So just to sum up, the Buddha asked us to strive with ethical vigilance. So in a way, he was asking us to focus on this quest to increase our ethical sensitivity and awareness. So I've mentioned these ways that we could do that, but I've also talked about the other aspects of mindfulness as well. And I wanted to do this because you might have noticed, or you might have seen, that there is overlap between them. You can't really have one without the others. And although the Buddha does exhort us to be ethically mindful, in fact, we need all three to live an effective Dharma life and to be mindful. So through sati, we learn to perceive our experience directly and clearly, without stories, and we can be in the gap. But then when we apply sampajanya, we can start to make intelligent choices with an awareness of our highest ideals and where we're headed, so we have a direction. And then when we apply appamada to that situation, we have an awareness, we're fully aware of the ethical dimension and effects of that behaviour and those choices. And we can strive on then to restrain our unskillful behaviour and augment our skillful behaviour so that our behaviour and our effect in the world becomes more and more beautiful and positive. So this mindfulness, this path to enlightenment, you could see it as a dance between these three aspects of mindfulness, where we're gradually moving and dancing towards manifesting the beauty of the Buddha more and more in our behaviour, in every moment, more and more, until eventually the path ends and we manifest it completely. And that's when we become the Buddha and we become completely free.